Ah, there we are. There we are. All right. I guess we're going to kick it off here. Welcome to another session hosted by Hoard of Tales of highlighting women in gaming for this whole month. And today's discussion is going to be about engaging new players. And before we get started, I guess let's introduce people who will be talking here. So I'm just going to go clockwise around the screen. So Philippa, tell us a bit who you are and what are some just bullet points, what you're hoping to share.
So hi, I'm Philippa. If you've been watching, I've been on a few other things so far, which is nice. So I'm Philippa Mort on Twitter. You can find me at Mort Philippa. I write stuff to do with D&D, and I also write some little mini games on itch.io, but you can find it all on my Twitter page. And I play lots of different games. And yeah, today talking about engaging players, I'm excited to talk about what sort of games are good for engaging new players, because I think a lot of new players are keen to jump straight into something like D&D, which can be tricky to teach in comparison to easier games. So I'm excited to have a chat about that at some point today.
Thank you. Nice to meet you again, Philippa. I've seen you on some other shows, hopefully not the last one. And next I have Dawn, who I'm also personally dying to know about. This is my first time on stream with her.
Hey, I'm Dawn, and I primarily make videos about tabletop role-playing games with my partner over on Roll for Initiative, or R4I Vlog on Twitter. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about engaging new players, how to bring more people kind of into the hobby and introduce it, because I know it can be a bit intimidating. So kind of finding those easy points of entry, as well as bringing up that tabletop role-playing games isn't just Dungeons and Dragons. So if fantasy doesn't appeal to somebody, there are other games out there.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. That's my curiosity is piqued. I'm Ida. I am lurker extraordinaire on the internet, and I think I am that person who is really interested in tabletop role playing games, and was only introduced or siphoned into Dungeons and Dragons. And thanks to very encouraging people, I'm trying to expand my horizons with a lot of awesome ladies here on Hoard of Tales, with my network of friends as well. And I've only been playing for about, let's say, just under 3 years. So I consider myself indeed to be that new player. And I'm going to chat with a different perspective because I used to work at a game company where my job was engaging existing players. So we'll see how that discussion joins up. And last but not least, best for last with the dramatic entrance, we have one other person coming in, and our producer is working hard. There we go.
Sorry.
We were introducing ourselves.
Oh, perfect. I don't know who I am right now. Give me a moment to put myself together here. I assume you're talking about me, right?
Yes, we've just
Okay,
gone
cool.
around.
Perfect. Sorry. Today is that kind of day. I am Jenna Figures. If you watch Hoard of Tales for the past couple months, you might have seen me before. I was Sadria on the Rise of the Ice Dragons campaign. I am a community moderator for Ladies of D&D. I also stream from time to time on the Ladies of D&D channel. And I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who taught a lot of the introductory tutorials for Ladies of D&D. And I'm one of the, not in charge, but one of the people very passionate about making sure that the community that we're in is very open to new people who have not gotten the chance to play games before because of gatekeeping or previous issues with people at the table or whatever the case may be. So that's mostly my experience with this, is working with Ladies of D&D.
Glad to have you with us. You're primed and ready to go.
Always.
Excellent.
Definitely. Yes.
Awesome. no, your timing was exactly where we needed you to be. Like, there you are, go. So that being said, just to reiterate, we are going to be talking about engaging new players overall in tabletop RPGs. And like mentioned, we each have a bit different perspectives. So let's more broad discussion. Someone mentioned that Dungeons and Dragons, as popular as it is nowadays, thanks to its exposure in a lot of modern media, is not the only TTRPG in the world. There are others, but Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, to be specific, seems to be that funneling point. And maybe all of us here knowing a bit about it might be more complicated comparatively, relatively to some other games. That being said, in your experience, do you think that there are perhaps alternatives that might ease more players or might calm their fears to say that game looks very complicated, I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm curious, but I'm limiting myself? How would you address that kind of person?
So I think if somebody is especially intimidated by the amount of rules and stuff like that, is one of Grant Howitt's games. He's got a couple, they're like one page, very simple. You've got like a handful of stats that you roll. And those I found can be really great to introduce people because it's not a ton of rules. They're usually one shots. So it's also somebody isn't agreeing to do a full campaign and suddenly like, I want to try this out. Cause I think that's a nicer way to kind of introduce somebody where there's not that long-term expectation. They can do one and go, ooh, this is interesting. I can dip my toes in.
Remind me, he's the creator of Honey Heist?
Yeah, Honey Heist. He's got Crash Pandas and I think one or two other ones.
Goat Crashers, where you're a little goat at a party.
Yes. And I think Wizards and something.
Wizards like... and... I'm going to get it wrong. Someone has a game called Sexy Battle Wizards, which I think is an amazing name for a game. But
and just as a quick reminder, since someone mentioned Honey Heist, Hoard of Tales is streaming a Honey Heist one-shot on June 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time and 7 p.m. Central European Time. So be there. It'll be fun and awesome.
So what was the question originally? It was, what other games apart from D&D do we like introducing new players with, or like tools as well?
Well, let's say, hi, I'm Ida. I heard you have Math Rocks and I want to play, but I don't know. I don't know if RP is good for me. That looks a bit cringe. And I heard there's some rules and there's all this math and sheets. And I don't know if it's for me, but I really want to. What should I do?
Sure. I'm just thinking about what I normally do. The main thing I think I try and do with this sort of stuff is get a buddy to bring them in, rather than like having someone by themselves. Like, even if they are one of my real life friends, I try and get another friend to come with them who they already know, who maybe knows a little bit more to help them along. So even if they are doing D&D or something a bit more mathsy, they can then turn, rather than always having to turn to me when I'm busy DMing as well, they can turn to someone else. What does this mean? Like, what should I do right now? I think that's quite helpful. And then the RP, I'll let other people talk a minute, but the RP side, I normally just say, like, play yourself to start with. No matter what game we're playing, like, just play a version of yourself, and then you don't have to RP as much to begin with. So there's probably the main two things I kind of think about when introducing someone.
I would say for me, it depends on if this person is new to tabletop games or if this person is new to gaming in general. I feel that makes a pretty big difference. I've had some friends who are not into board games, or maybe kind of into video games, or maybe just like action movies, and have no idea what I'm talking about when I say I play D&D. What's that? Oh, it's do you like Lord of the Rings? Is kind of where I start. But if you have no idea what a tabletop RPG is, I'm not going to start you with Dungeons and Dragons, quite frankly. I'm just not going to start there. It's intimidating. And that's where I would do exactly what Dawn said. And I would start with something like Honey Heist, something that is very not complicated, something that is very low stakes, something that is easy if you are intimidated by roleplay or feel like you don't want to be the person who is holding down the rest of your group. You don't get that kind of feeling in a very loose and very fun and kind of silly game like Honey Heist. I think that one is a perfect one to start with if you are completely new to the idea of TTRPGs in general. For someone who is kind of familiar with the idea, maybe has played some, you know, if you've played like Skyrim or any of the Oblivion games, or if you're really into board games, or you kind of have an idea of what crunch in other media looks like, and you know what you are looking for, like, you know, you want something high fantasy, or you know, you want something sci-fi, or I mean, those are the two kind of big heavy hitter genres, but, or you know, you want something like industrial and gritty, I will probably find something a little bit more rules light in those specific genres. If someone is very particularly interested in Dungeons and Dragons, I will actually start them with a one shot in Dungeon World. I know recently there's been some controversy with the creator of Dungeon World. Setting all of that aside, Dungeon World itself is rules light, and it's very easy to understand the mechanics intuitively, even if you don't necessarily know a whole lot about general TTRPG systems. And because you create the world in Dungeon World every time you play, it doesn't have this huge baggage of lore that you don't know, which can be intimidating if you start, for example, a Dungeons and Dragons one shot in the Sword Coast. If you don't know anything about the Sword Coast and everybody else around you, that can feel like, am I playing my elf wrong? You know, so starting with something simpler and something that's a little bit more clean slate and something that you put together at the table, like Dungeon World, can be much more approachable than having 40 years, 50 years, oh my gosh, almost 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons with all the lore and all the meta and all the everything.
You bring up a couple of points there. Thank you. You bring up quite a couple of points, which I think that Philippa and Dawn also mentioned, and that is indeed the idea of specific barriers into playing that might be intimidating to people. And some of the things that were touched on in the discussion so far were things that were rules heavy. So just to quickly say, would you say that is rules necessarily a big barrier into playing things? Is it a problem that the rules are not well explained? If rules are difficult, why have them at all? Do they make the game more or less fun? What is your take on that?
I think it can be intimidating, but I also know some players that they really like that aspect because it gives them a lot more guidance. So that's, I think, is kind of asking a few questions of like, are you looking for something that provides a very loose, very basic rule set? Do you like having a bunch of options that you get to choose from, and then this tells you exactly who your character is? And I think sometimes rules heavy can work better for people that want to maybe have like a role play light game, that it is much more focused on the exploration combat side of role playing.
Definitely. So basically, there's a menu, and people rather I'm not going to say a good DM, but a DM hopefully is able to guide and manage the expectations and say, like, you want to play, I want to kindle that enthusiasm, but I might know a better avenue for you. That is maybe rules heavy. Maybe the people really want to get out the Excel spreadsheets and, I don't know, play EVE Online or something.
I think also to add to that, like some games, it's hard to know what you can do in the game until you've been playing for a little while. And I think that sort of game is much more difficult to learn on the fly, and therefore is difficult to teach to someone new. Whereas, Jen, am I right in thinking Dungeon World is powered by the Apocalypse? Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah, so Powered by the Apocalypse have got the basic move sheet, which you can print off separately, which I really like. And like, then you just have a couple of moves to start with for your character. And I think that's so much easier because it's basically all on maybe 1 or 2 sheets that you can just print off. And I feel like that makes it a lot less intimidating to someone, because they can just point and be like, this thing, I want this thing now. Whereas something like, say, Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, like, where am I in this 500-page rule book that I haven't had time to read all of before this session? Like, I think that's when it can get a little bit too complicated. If someone just doesn't have the time to invest into doing something they don't even know if they're going to like, is, yeah, probably when it's going to get a little bit of a higher barrier for entry.
I think it would be correct to say that there ought to be some payoff for the
Yes.
investment that you make. And this is something also that Jenna touched into, is some games like D&D, I'm going to keep hoping on D&D because that's at least what I know primarily. I'm that new player. That there might be certain universes that you play in that are intrinsically lore heavy. But instead of just waving off and saying, oh, there might be games that are less lore heavy and thus more inviting, what are ways we can encourage new players as GMs, the talented bunch I have in front of me here, to maybe make that lore appealing? What's a good bait for your hook in order to reel them in, where they're going to be living for your eventual lore dumps in whatever game or setting that is?
I think I actually just want to touch on one thing that I forgot to mention. Dawn brought it up, and I think it's a really good point of some people are looking for more rules. A great example is I have a number of friends who are on the autism spectrum, and for certain autistic people, having a lot of structure can be very helpful and very comforting. So definitely knowing your player and just talking to them and looking for, asking what they're looking for and what's going to be better for them. For someone who really wants structure and wants to be told what things are, I don't think I would have picked Dungeon World. It's a very like loosey-goosey, you tell me sort of game, and it's not comfortable for everybody. So I do want to thank you, Dawn, for reeling me back in. So in that sense, maybe not everybody is looking for a lore heavy experience. And I think that's part of just finding out what your player is interested in and what their strengths are and what they're looking to expand in, but also kind of what they think is important. Because if they don't think that lore is important, then that's going to choose what game you put them in, not necessarily that I would steer them to make them think that lore is important. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think if you do have folks who are interested in lore, but they don't want to have to go out and read years and years worth of material.
Right. You're saying you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars on campaign settings all at once for this one shot? What?
I think kind of setting up with having characters where it's like, oh, your character doesn't need to start out with this existing lore. They will learn it as you, the player, are learning it. So having the character that's a stranger in a strange land, where it makes sense why, oh yeah, I don't know the customs, or I don't know what this monster is, because you're new there, your character's new there. So then that makes it easier because the player knowledge matches with the character knowledge.
Also, I think we mentioned like explaining if someone likes Lord of the Rings, like you can also draw this. This refers back to what we were talking about another stream about medieval fantasy. But if you draw on sort of common themes that people will have seen in movies and stuff, I feel like that's quite helpful. Like one of the things I often do with new players is kind of I'm like zoom out or zoom in, and I sort of frame it as if we're watching like our characters on a movie, and I feel like that helps people like transition into the role play and like getting into the zone of everything. And I think that can help with like lore as well. You can be like, okay, well, what would your character know, and like get it related to their character, as opposed to just like, you need to know all of this. It's like, okay, here's the general stuff, and like we'll sort of drip feed you the rest, as you said, Dawn, like gently.
I think from my perspective, a lifetime ago, I used to work in a game company, not TTRPG, not any game any of you have played. That's not really relevant, but one of the things we would do to engage existing and new players, and I think this would work well in TTRPGs or Dungeons and Dragons specifically as well, is that we allowed players every now and then to make a decision, let's say a cosmetic decision about the game, to get them invested in what the game is. So let's say as a brand new player who in a world with some lore that the player might not be familiar with, as the DM at the table, you can say, hey, Dawn, uh, you see that the priest from the local church has walked up to you. Uh, could you tell me what color the priest's robes are?
They're blue.
Okay, now the high priest of I don't know of Bahamut in his blue robes, and now as a player, without knowing much about it, you've created a personal little pin into that world. Some simple decision now has a meaningful representation, and as a consequence, you feel connected just by having decided that the robes of this order from here on out are blue. So that is something we did back when I worked as a community manager for Engaging Players. But when I think of applying it that way, I think it would be cool to let my players at a table, or to, as a player, let them decide these small little mundane things. But they're not mundane because as a player, they have a small but meaningful impact, and thus let me really hook into the bigger world.
I've just seen a really good comment as well about this, where I think the Chindividual said like you can have a movie night for stuff similar to your game. I love that idea. I feel like that would be super useful for someone who isn't like used to the vibe of the game we're going for. So, really
I've also given my players, like each player gets a piece of lore that I give them kind of the basic and kind of similar to what Ada, you were saying, where they can flesh out the details. And then this is stuff that I kind of tell them like, hey, sometime in the first session or the first couple of sessions, find a way to kind of bring this up for the party. So that gives them, it's not me just dumping all of the lore as the game master, but it gives the players an opportunity. And I try and find something that would make sense of their character would know or have some connection to.
Oh, that's really cool. When a player, you're saying, has the role of the DM in that small instance to provide the lore to the players. That's a really cool way of sharing the spotlight and making them feel like they have a stake at the table now. A really cool idea. I like that.
So when you do that, especially with new players, are you sending like a link to a Google Doc or something to them before the game that they can, like, are you giving them that information beforehand, or is it like kind of while you're playing, or how do you normally?
Yeah, usually it's beforehand. Like if we're sitting down to create the characters, or just okay, a few minutes, and I'll just give them like a short little paragraph, so it's not a lot of info that they then have to learn, but it's something about the world that they get to, like, oh, the who this particular politician is, or you have this knowledge of this church. So when that's going to come up in game, they can be the one to be like, oh, this is what this symbol means.
I like that a lot. That's really cool.
That's a good idea. Are there any other suggestions from your experience that you've used to hook in new players to the experience or to the story as a whole? Any other spotlight moments like, oh, that was really cool, that happened to you as a player or you as the DM?
I love to let my players take the spotlight, especially for your first, depending on what game you're playing, of course, but combat or spell, or if they're an investigator, like the first time they roll investigation to look over something, just kind of take a moment then to be like, what does your magic look like? Or, you know, what kind of weapon do you have? How do you, you know, what does it look like when you're fighting this goblin? Or just kind of let them have a moment where they're explaining what it is they look like and what it is they're doing, and kind of ground themselves in the world a little bit more. Especially something like, you know, what does it look like when you cast a spell? I don't care, quite frankly, what the spell says it looks like. I don't care if the spell says a green burst of energy. If my player's like, oh, this is like, I'm all like magic themed and I've got like a magic wand like Houdini and like birds fly out of it. Awesome. That's how your magic works. That's so cool. Like, if that's what's getting you excited about being this character, I'm all in. Like, so just taking that moment to like, well, what do you do? And then also giving, especially other players, maybe if this is like a normal group and we've got like one new person or whatever, like making sure everybody gets just that little spotlight of kind of introducing yourself to the rest of the party, I think does a lot to kind of give the player a better idea of who they are in the game and what they're doing.
And hopefully what to expect and what kind of theme or vibe they're going to have for session 2 to session 50. Hopefully, God willing.
Yeah. Another thing I do is more on the player side rather than the character side, is that I'll explain the rules to like everyone rather than like, so for example, say I'm like, okay, roll an investigation check. I'll always then explain like, that's with your D20, you need to add this thing. But I explain it to everyone in the group rather than just the new player. So I'm not like focusing out. I'm not like, okay, only you don't know what's going on, so I need to explain it. I'm like, okay, everyone, I'm going to just tell everyone. And then also with that, you were saying like, Jenna, about like kind of getting them into the world. Like I try and get my own acting kind of like right in the zone and go for it to make them feel like, okay, well, Phil's being weird right now and making all these funny noises and voices and describing stuff. Okay, I feel like I can do that now as well, because, you know, she's broken the ice to get started. And I feel like those two techniques are quite useful as well for sort of getting them a bit calmer and more used to it.
You bring up something interesting that I can hook into something you mentioned earlier, which is in the best universe, perhaps your new player also comes with a buddy new player, or maybe, just maybe, said player is an experienced player. I don't know if any of you, I haven't had the experience of being that experienced friend to a new person. So what would be good ways or good advice to help that person without playing over their shoulder? What are things to be mindful of? What are approaches you'd like to advocate for in doing that?
Being another player in the group?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing is not telling the new player what to do, but asking them, you know, what do you want to do? I will explain how you go about it. Because I've definitely had situations where I've been playing a new game, or I've seen it where somebody says, oh, you need to make an attack, so you need to do this. And that kind of takes a lot of the agency away, which is the great thing about tabletop role-playing games, where maybe that player actually didn't want to make an attack roll, they wanted to do something else. So kind of asking like, what do you want to do? And then explaining, okay, I will explain how you go about doing that.
Yeah, I think so. And also, like, if you've got, say, skills, I feel like sometimes people don't always remember immediately, like, what all of the different skill names mean. And so also with that, you can be like, would you like to find out about this thing? Oh, no, okay, that's fine. And yeah, as you say, don't like open question rather than you should do this right now. It's what would you would you like to try this? There's these options. Here you go. I like that. As someone who has learnt new games and taught new games.
I think that so role playing in general, when you're in a party and part of a team, it's important to like play off each other rather than just do whatever you're going to do and then the next person does whatever they're going to do and there's basically no interaction. It's always important to kind of role play together, but I think especially with a new person, when you as a player are very familiar with your character or familiar with the mechanics, it's easy to just go first, right? It's easy to be like, oh, they're looking over their sheet. While we're waiting for them, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And I'm going to handle all this and I'm going to move the story along. And that's maybe not necessarily what would happen in the game if I'm, you know, there's a puzzle in front of us and I'm a fighter and the new person is like super smart detective or whatever. It would probably be better for everyone involved if instead of going, well, I'm a fighter and I'm dumb, so I'm just going to walk up and start whacking things. That's what my character would do. It would probably be more welcoming, a little bit better, if instead my fighter came up to the detective and went, you're really smart. What do you think we should do? Or something like that. Like have an interaction about it instead of just kind of taking my turn, so to speak, and then, okay, I'm done. And I'm just going to stare at you. And I've given you no help and no indication that your party is going to do anything with you. You figure out your own thing on your own. We're waiting is very intimidating. So sort of bringing a conversation in with the characters. And then if in the conversation something comes up that the new, you know, the new character is like, oh, I think I would do this, then the DM can very easily jump in and say, that sounds like this kind of check, or it sounds like you're trying to use this feature or whatever. And then you have a better idea of what mechanically would be happening. So I think just engaging as people rather than mashing X to move forward.
And like depending on the player, they may need a bit of like dead air, like don't jump straight, like you're saying, don't jump straight in, but also don't worry if there's a bit of quiet for a bit as everyone thinks about stuff. Like I feel like that's something I'm bad at. I'm like, fill the space and talk. But no.
That's definitely a valid point. And even if it's not mechanical assistance, which is a good, Jenna definitely brings up, it's good to encourage that player to explore their skills, what they can do mechanically, game-wise. It's also maybe a good idea that if Jenna were a brand new player at the table and I'm the experienced one, and if I'm having a role play tirade, and let's say we're at a setting in the front of a campfire, I can say my character turns to Jenna's character, and I physically move my hand in front of the camera and hands her my water canteen. So I've also created a non-mechanical but way to rope in Jenna as a player. I am physically extending my hand to you and pretending there's a water canteen in it. And I'm also sending that visual confirmation, like, hey, engage with me at this level. It's something very simple. No stakes, just
yeah, that's good.
She's not taking it. There we go.
This is how you hold canteens, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Doing it wrong.
Also,
I have int -1.
Also on the teaching the mechanics side, I usually try and ask people like, do you want me to explain everything, or do you want to try and figure it out and ask for help if you need it? Because some people are definitely going to want you to, like, every time we have a new, like the first time we're in combat, the first time I have to make a skill check, tell me how to do it. And there are other people that are, I'm going to learn this by figuring it out on my own. And so I'm going to try and do it. And if I'm wrong, then step in and say, oh, you actually want to roll this dice instead of this dice for this check. And learn, just ask them like, hey.
And there are definitely different types of learners. I teach art as part of my what I do professionally. So not everybody knows what type of learner they are, but there are visual learners. Maybe reading it is going to be how you retain it. There's auditory learners, someone telling you and you listening to it could be helpful. And some people are kinesthetic learners where they don't really get it until they do it. So it could be a little bit different for everybody. It could be just wait a minute, I'm reading my sheet and then I'll understand is perfectly valid. And it could be having you explain what's on the sheet, or even honestly, even reading it out loud can be helpful for some people, even if it's already right there in front of them. Or just, okay, I'm gonna try this and then we'll see if it works. And it really just depends on everybody's learning style. Everybody's brain's a little bit different, and that's totally okay.
TLDR, be mindful, be gentle, and do not grab someone else's dice and roll for them. In so many words of everything that was discussed.
Don't touch the dice.
That's it. That's the whole panel. We're done here. That's all we can say.
So, okay, new player liked your introductory speech, liked that there was going to be hooks personalizing their experience, and liked the fact that there will be gentle guided explanation and learning along the way. So new player gets ready for a session, for their first session, sits down, and because we are a panel focusing on women in gaming, I don't know if this is your experience, but maybe you or other female players have sat down at a table and then realized, I don't know any of these people. There are a lot of men.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at me weird. What kind of things can we do to maintain that engagement, but also to extend to said player that this is going to be a safe place? And what are some ways we can, as DMs, GMs, ensure or weed out problems that would affect said safe space?
It is hard to have a session 0 for a 1-shot, because that inherently makes it a 2-shot.
Mm-hmm.
But some sort of communication beforehand, always. I mean, you don't invite someone over to dinner without asking them what their allergies are, right? Because they could show up and then it turns out that they can't eat anything that you've spent all day making. So even if just quick emails back and forth of comfortable levels and stuff like that, but I think before the game is mostly where I make sure everybody is aware. We are not going to have any sort of sexual harassment or anything like that in this game. I don't play games with racism in them. Like, just kind of going down the list of like, here's what we're not gonna do. So if there's anything else that you need to not happen, let's talk about it before the game. And then everybody is aware. Men, women, new, experienced, it doesn't matter. You know, when you sit down at my table, we're not going to have an interaction where the rogue goes around slashing people's bra straps off. That's not happening in this game. Just to level every playing field.
Yeah, we can spend some time talking about. Yeah, let's devote a little bit of time to indeed those safety tools in that case, because I think Hoard of Tales had plans for have a discussion of this. I don't know if it was going to happen, but it's a cool topic, one worth delving into, and one that definitely helps to create this sphere of accountability, of safety, and welcomeness. That, of course, is very important to new players and equally to existing veteran players. So Philippa and Don, anything on that topic or experiences, tools you'd like to personally recommend?
So, do you mind if I go first, Dawn?
Yeah, go.
So I do similar to Jenna. I will try and do some form of session 0. If it's a one-shot, what I'll often do is, like you say, like have a group chat and I'll sort of put the basics in, and then I'll also say, we're going to spend 15 minutes to half an hour just chatting over what we should expect at this table. I also ruthlessly steal different things from different games. So one thing I steal and I use in all of my games is from the Powered by the Apocalypse system, from stuff like Monster of the Week, where they have the GM's agenda and the player agenda, and it says all the stuff like, as a GM, my goal is to give you, like, have a good time, put you in peril, but let you escape, and things like that. And then the players, it's like, we're going to work together and we're going to, you know, make sure we have a nice time and things like that. And And I feel like that's a really useful thing to bring into other stuff. So you're saying all of like, okay, we're not going to have PvP if we're player versus player if we don't want. We're not going to do this and that, but also we're going to positively try and do these things. And I think that can help also, because it can be a bit scary as a new player to be like, okay, no sexism, no racism. You're like, was that not a possibility? Oh my gosh. So if you go, okay, but here's the things we want to see. We want to see some interaction. We want to see what you want to do. We're going to see you describing stuff. So I feel like that way, framing it as an agenda, I think is a quite a useful tool. Oh, also, there's that safety tool, stars and wishes, I think is quite good for new players because it's really simple. And it's basically stars is like stuff you liked, and then wishes is stuff you wish you could see. And you can do it before and after the game. But it's simple, so it's a good tool for new people.
You.
Yeah.
Don?
Yeah,
I think having
I'm
I'll let Don go.
Oh, I'm a big advocate of using safety tools. There are a whole bunch different out there, lines and veils, which I do like because then you can have some things that maybe are a little uncomfortable, but you're not going to go into detail of it, like we'll fade to black and not describe what happens, but it can still exist in the game if people are comfortable. Monty Cook has a really great it's a couple sheets
The consent
that you can
sheets.
go through and fill out. Yeah, the consent. And I like that because it not only has the I don't want this in the game, but it also has a section that you can circle for like, yes, I'm really excited about this. So I think that's a great way to show like safety tools isn't just limiting, but it's also seeing what people are excited for. And if I'm like running a one shot, especially if it's a module or something that I know these are the topics that are being covered, I always try and make sure to kind of give a like PG rating and then like content warning. That is like, if you watch anything on TV or streaming things, it pops up with the PG rating and then why it's that rating. So that way, if a player goes, oh, something on that isn't for me, they can step out or they can say, can we take this out? And I can look at it and go, yeah, sure, we can lose that. Or, if it's something like, well, it's a horror game, so I can't really take out all of the scares because that ruins the point. I can say, cool, we'll run something that's more up your alley next time. Like, okay, this isn't the game to introduce you to tabletop role-playing games.
So it's definitely in that case not just handy to inform the players what to expect and what they can prevent themselves from exposing if they have whatever their personal reasons that they're right to have for not wanting to be exposed to that. It's also informative for the DM because if you get back such a sheet with either veils and lines, wishes and stars, or consent of players who really want to see descriptive explanations of satanic rituals involving the mutilation of defenseless children, then as a DM to say this is not, it's a safety for you as a DM, GM as well.
Yeah, I think that gets missed a lot of times because I've had times where I've, as the game master, had to say like, oh, hold on, the player introduced something that I'm not comfortable running. And kind of that was to me the moment I had that moment where I was like, oh, I need to fill out one of these as well to give my players just to be like, yeah, because they can introduce it's all in our imaginations.
Yep.
Yeah, I've had to do that with I always included in that like pre-game talk. I'm like, personally, romance for me with you as my friends, I find that strange. Like some people are totally chill with it. Personally, I'm not a huge fan. Like I'm not at that point in my RP career, so I'm just like, we're not gonna do it. We're gonna draw that little veil over because I don't want to. Like you might want to do it, but I don't want to see it. So yeah. No thanks.
No, that's perfect. I think everyone is allowed to have their line. And at the end of the day, it's that open DM, GM who has to arbitrate that line. And I think the minimum has to come from them ultimately. And that level of responsibility is also a good signal, especially to new players, saying, if my game master can draw a line here, if I feel there's a line being crossed, I am comfortable in asking them about it and having them enforce that thing. So if I see them standing up for themselves, it's more likely that they're going to stand up for me.
Yeah, modeling it is good. Did you have something to say, Jenna?
Earlier when you were talking about the agenda thing, I was just saying that that can be really helpful for certain neurodivergent people, just understanding the structure and kind of knowing going in what they're looking for and what's going to happen can be very grounding for certain people. So I think that's helpful kind of across the board. Anyway, to bring it back to new players then from this discussion, I feel like kind of going over the information that all your players have given you, all the feedback that you've gotten on what they want and what they don't want and what they're expecting and what they're really not looking for, and all that. It's kind of then your responsibility as a GM to put the group together or move or remove players as necessary to keep it safe, a good time for everybody involved.
Pleasant, stable experience.
Yeah. So for this one shot, maybe where you have one new player and you have an experienced player who wants to play this new character they just came up with, and this character is going to have a really dramatic death in the one shot, and it's going to be so cool. I, as a GM, love that. But I'm not going to put that person in that character in a one shot where the new person's like, I don't want anybody to die. Like,
yeah.
Cool. We can separate these. We'll just do different things. So yeah, just making sure that the other players that you put in a group with a new person and the specific characters that they're playing this time sort of gel well. I know if you're experienced, if you've been doing this forever, if you yourself are also a GM and now you're in a player seat and you're like, well, cool, I've come up with 50 characters since the last time I've been able to be a player. I can just play one of them. Just making sure that everybody, because of the communication you had beforehand, that everybody knows, like, okay, maybe not this character. Okay, maybe I'll ask that person to play with this new player instead of this other person. And it's not anything personal, just making sure that the group is going to go well so this new person doesn't get like totally intimidated by everything going in.
I'll also like take the experienced people aside at the beginning and say, hey, can you please help me? I'm busy DMing, can you please help me with this new person, and can you encourage them and tell them the things we've been talking about, and get them on side basically, rather than sort of trying to battle with them as well because they've got their sparkly shiny character they want to show off. It's like, no, please, can you help me? And I find that can help as well.
I also like to try and, if we're actually playing in person, which isn't happening very much right now, to put the people who are new next to the game master, because I find that it makes it easier for me as the game master. If there's a question, I can hear them very well. It also makes it a lot easier for them to get engaged with everybody else, because especially if you have like an established group, they're going to be looking at this person a lot because they're looking at the game master. So it's going it gets rid of the out of sight, out of mind, or like the new person kind of like hanging out in the corner at the party and nobody talks to them. They're going to get more engaged, and kind of, even if they're a little quieter, they're part of the group.
That is remarkably simple, but remarkably effective at the same time. How just physically seating them next to the DM means everyone looks in that direction. And like you said, they're not that wallflower at the party. That's a really good idea. That's so simple. I can't wait to play in person again.
I've had that happen. We had some new players, but also I was a new DM, so I didn't really think about it. And they were sort of off on this side sofa, and I look over and they're just like, we're really tired. This is really difficult. And they'd had a long day. Like, I think that's another thing to remember is like, it's hard, mentally tiring the first time you play something new and learn all these rules. So like, give them lots more breaks than you would normally give to experienced players and things like that as well, because they're probably quite tired and working hard.
Okay, so they're at your table. They're pleased with the boundaries you've set up, the expectations. They're pleased that they're going to get active mentorship from you. But as the DM GM, your table is nothing but new players, and they barely survived the 2 kobolds you threw at them because you kept rolling 19s and 20s. How do you, this is a bit more personal rather than like what should you or shouldn't you, but what do you think? Do you think it's better to add in a DMPC? Do you are you a fan of fudging the rolls, or do you prefer to just say like, nope, the dice and the rules have spoken, suck it up, buttercup?
So I think it's fine to fudge rolls every now and again if someone's going to die and it wouldn't be dramatically appropriate. But also the main thing I do is guided questions. So if someone is like, I'm gonna jump off this bridge, I'll be like, okay, pause, out of character. So what you want to do is jump off. This is what will happen if you do this. Are you sure you want to do that? What about this? And like, you know, what are you thinking of doing? And yeah, I sort of try and I'll do a lot of like, okay, pause, let's talk this through. What are you trying to achieve here? Rather than letting them go and yeah, killing themselves in 5 seconds because they didn't realize that that was a danger. So I think that, yeah, guided questions and pausing a lot and explaining the situation is how I kind of handle that sort of stuff. And yeah, maybe lowering the difficulty if I've misjudged it as well.
Sure.
But yeah, do other people do the same?
I definitely will fudge a roll, especially if it's like, yeah, if, you know, somebody rolled something and, you know, is going to like accidentally fireball the whole whole party and have a total party kill. Like, that's not going to be fun.
And they probably don't realize they were going to do it. So
yeah. And I do a similar, like, I'll kind of say like, are you sure? Or double check, you know, maybe reread how that spell works, because I know, yeah, especially sometimes people read the title of a spell and not read the actual wording, so they're like, this is going to be great. I'm like, it's an area of effect. And I don't usually use like a like GM character, but I do like sending them with a NPC that's going to kind of be there to support them. So not take an active role in a lot of things, but can kind of, I can use as a game master to step in if they need guidance. That character can be like, oh, I have an idea. Or, you know, if they got really knocked out, I can suddenly just be like, yeah, and this guy's walking around with the healing potion and stops this character from dying. And the players don't know that I just added that to his inventory.
So one thing I try and do is telegraph what's happening as much as I can, because the character is actually in this room. They see how many doors, they know where the doors are, they know what it smells like, they know it's dark, they know whatever. Like, the character knows this, but we are sitting at a table in the air conditioning with chips in front of us. So it's a completely different thing than what your character is going through. So I will try, and especially for something, Philippa, like you said, if they're like, they don't seem to understand that if you jump off this bridge, you're gonna just become a character pancake. So trying to be like, so your character would know this. You see, you know, this plunges down into the abyss and you lose sight of the bottom or whatever, like giving those sorts of clues that's so you get the idea that if you did this, this might happen. And then you have agency, exactly like you said. I'm going to be totally honest and spill all my DM secrets here. Seems like the time and place for it. Especially with new people and in every one shot I run, no matter how experienced everyone is, I pay 0 attention to the hit points of my monsters. Monsters die when it's cool for them to die. So I don't fudge rolls as far as how much damage the baddies are doing. but if this character pulls out all the stops and, 7th level spell, and they roll super well, and they're like having so much fun calculating all this damage, they don't need to know if there was 1 hit point left and the first cantrip did it. That's just, no, that's not true. The cool thing did it. So if it seems like this is going a little faster than it probably should, then I'm just gonna go until it makes sense. Or if it seems like this is going so slow, all right, well, so the hit points of my bad guys is really like, I don't care about that. Everything else, all right, game structure, this is what we're playing. But that's the part that I'm like, that's gray.
Yeah.
It's definitely good, as you mentioned. Go ahead. I was just going to mention that I thought Jenna's point of the way where she informs that a player says, you would know this, is a really good way of bringing agency to the player. And that was the only thing I wanted to comment on that, because I thought that was like a very good and solid, concrete tip to give. Go ahead, Dawn.
Yeah, Jenna just brought up a good point about like kind of the opposite end if combat is dragging on, because that can happen, especially people who maybe are new and don't have a full grasp of like, well, what does everything do? So they're like, I'm just going to keep doing this thing because I know it, and it's like, well, you could be doing so much more damage. That because dragging combat on can be just as boring as if everybody died.
Yeah.
Everyone dies.
There have definitely been times when we spend 45 minutes trying to kill the mimic because everybody's rolling low, and I never again. The mimic just doesn't have that many hit points, okay? You did it. It's fine. We're literally fighting a couch right now. We're moving on.
Perfect. You probably just rolled for the hit dice privately aside, and then it was on the low end of the average or something. Who knows? Or it was already damaged when you came into the encounter. Players will never know.
It's custom. You just never know with me. I'm full of mystery and intrigue.
Also, if you're new, you don't know how many hit dice it should have, so...
Exactly.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left until the break, or our producer can say we can just take a break now because there seems to be a nice little pause, unless there's something else on this topic.
I did have something I was thinking about. We were talking about safety tools, and I remembered one that I really liked that someone introduced me to when I was learning a new game. And so we talk about all the safety tools, and they've got fancy names and stuff, and I feel like it can be easy to forget all of those names if you're a new player. So we have one that I add on top of my other stuff, which is just called I want to make a genuine request. And so we're joshing about, we're having a bit of banter, we're all having a good time. And then you go, I'd like to make a genuine request that we move on. And everyone knows, and I say that phrase means we're moving on now, whether that is from joking about with each other, playful RPG, ribbing or whatever, or even like, I don't like this scene. Someone can just say that phrase and we move on. And I feel like it's a useful tool to have on top of like styles and lines or veils, because all of those words can get mixed up if you're new and you don't know what they all mean. So having a phrase that is just plain, and either is like stop, pause, let's move on, I want to make a genuine request that we stop, like just having something that kind of like basically a safe word, but that fits in the context of what's going on, I think can be super useful for new players who aren't used to how safety tools work. Because it can be easy to kind of get caught up and then be like, I don't know how to use this. Ooh. So I would recommend that as well.
It's a good idea, definitely. Okay, we've had some quite concrete good ideas as how as DM and GMs we can facilitate the entry into new players. We've also talked about how new players can maybe bring themselves to the table using these I want to say more accessible things that we've created. So we're going to take a bit of a break, and we're going to continue the discussion in 5 minutes. So it is the hour. At 5 past the hour, we will be back wherever in the world you are. So thank you so much for hanging with us, and we'll see you again. Stretch, get water, and toodles. Hello, welcome back. If you heard our super secret discussions as we went into the break, please scrub those from your memory, or otherwise we will rebalance the encounter and Tiamat will fall from the sky and hurl rocks at you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody got their water? Good to go?
Got 2.
Okay.
I'm so ready.
Whoa.
Excellent.
And just as a quick reminder, Hoard of Tales, we're here thanks to Hoard of Tales. We're here thanks to the wonderful work behind the scenes of Dragonista Caro and her and the platform opening it up to players and fans of the community to share their insights, share their enthusiasm. We are immensely grateful for that opportunity, and there will be more opportunities to enjoy more faces from the community throughout the month. Just peek at the schedule really quick. I
For
think,
example, tomorrow,
yes,
some of us
tomorrow
are playing A Quiet Year.
A Quiet Year, I think it is.
Yeah.
Right here. Yeah.
That's going to be a feature, a one-shot of a different sort of TTRPG that involves drawing, I believe. I'm really curious about that. And
That's a fun one.
that's going to be at 12:30 Eastern time or 6:30 Central European time. And then the week after that, we're going to have a one-shot of Honey Heist, June 19th, and that will take place at 1 p.m. Eastern Time or 7 p.m. European Central Time. And then the day after that, we have another one-shot. So we're showcasing a lot of interesting TTRPGs that are not just Dungeons and Dragons. This one will be Glitter Hearts.
Run by me.
Yay!
So
We're gonna be
excited.
super duper powerful social media personalities on June 20th, and that will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Time or 8 p.m. Central European Time. You can follow Hoard of Tales on Twitter, where they will be posting reminders when these amazing shows are going to take place. I'm sure if I channel what I saw from previous Hoard of Tales, you scroll down below, there's Discord and all sorts of links for more information. And I know I'm here talking to you because I scrolled down and I clicked on the things and I started talking to people. And now I'm talking to you and I keep talking. I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you for letting me talk so much.
The individual says, I can barely wait for Honey Heist.
They send
all
me
the
your bear
puns.
puns so I can figure out a good bear name.
Oh, you just opened the floodgates because Marcus brings the puns.
So half of these are
so
Marcus's
many.
already. Okay, going back to our discussion about engaging new players. We've gotten to the table. They're excited. Some of your new players might have even brought their dice. But as new people, maybe they're not aware of existing etiquette at the table, or maybe they're not aware of the energy that they bring in, as good intentioned as it may have been, that might be disruptive to the table. So as DMs and GMs, what do you do to gently nudge players into said etiquettes? What are etiquettes that new players should know? And what are some behaviors to look out for that you should gently nip in the bud? And how would you do that in your experience? Who wants to go?
For me, it starts with character creation. As an example, played a group with a bunch of ladies who wanted to do like, Magic Mermaid fun time game. Not sirens. This is a different example. And another friend of ours came in and he was like, oh, you're playing a game. Can I play too? And we were like, sure, of course. Come sit down and join us. And he was like, I want to play an evil cultist of Cthulhu. And we're like, okay, let's pause and talk about this. I think that it can be easy if you're a new player, and especially if you're not used to TTRPGs, if you're used to board games that kind of set everything up for you, where it's a set, maybe a character piece, or maybe your pieces don't matter at all, and you're not choosing your personality, your character, or you're coming from a video game that's sort of the same way, where it's like a kind of set options. You maybe don't understand that you can be stepping on other people's toes, or potentially putting yourself in a situation where you are going to make a character that hurts the other characters or is just somehow kind of unpleasant in the game. As an experienced DM, it's pretty easy to see when that's going to happen. I mean, especially if you get a whole table of people who are like, I want to play Glitter Mermaids, and then someone wants to be an evil Cthulhu cultist, you can go like, I think probably the cultist person is, and then so here's kind of what I say to them at that point is, your character, you're going to have a hard time finding reasons why your character would be in this party. You are going to have a hard time with your character caring about the goals of the other players. You're going to have a hard time kind of going with the adventure the same way that other people are going to, and you might find yourself on the outs, and it might not be fun for you. You might find yourself in a position where you, as your character, can hurt another character, and you probably don't want that here. So just think about that. You're probably not going to have as much fun if you do this. And that is quite frankly exactly the way I phrase it, because it's easy to not think about it in those terms until, oh yeah, you're right. Probably an evil Cthulhu cultist would not be hanging around with a bunch of glitter mermaids. And then kind of tweak from there.
So one thing that I kind of reminded me of something is both in character creation and at the table, like reminding the new player, you're going to be playing as part of a party. You're going to be part of a group. So especially if it's somebody who maybe is coming from playing video games where they're used to, my character is the main character of the story. Well, at the table, the group is the main character, and all of that. And then also keep an eye out for, are they kind of stepping on other people's moments? Like somebody says, oh, I'm going to make an investigation check. And every time this person also wants to make an investigation check, or I want to do that. Me too. And just kind of be like, hey, that's great. We're going to let this person do the role. You can do it next time. Kind of gently reminding them like to share the spotlight. And sometimes, and that might also be like, when you take a break, just kind of pulling the player aside and be like, hey, are you noticing if you're that player is always trying to do what everybody else is doing? Be like, you can assist if that's what you want to do, but everybody gets to have a moment to shine, and just letting them know like, hey, you're kind of stepping on other people's toes, and when that happens, people are going to be less inclined to really want to include you when that's actually going to be what your character is strongest at.
I think also, like, to build on that, I've had this happen like with games I've been running, where you've got a couple of new people and one's quite shy and then one's very like, yeah, try everything. And one of the things I find happens a lot is people will sort of jokingly suggest they do stuff. Like, I find this is very common. It's like, oh, well, I'm just gonna stab them, and they don't actually mean it. And so what I'll normally do is I'll initially start by trying to sort of model how I want them to do it. So I'll be like, okay, but what do you actually do? And basically be like, I'm showing you right now that I don't think you should do that. But obviously not everyone's gonna, pick up on that straight away. So you might also just be like, well, if you do that, this is what will happen. Do you actually want to do that? And then they're like, oh, okay, I realized I was joshing around too much. I need to kind of reel it back. And then I'll have a chat as well if it's needed. But yeah, I try and sort of model it first, ideally. But yeah, depending on like how much people pick up on social cues, they may need a little bit of extra guidance on that as well. But yeah, I find generally just kind of like moving it along past whatever it is they're doing tends to sort of calm them down quite a lot as well.
I noticed something common in all three of your approaches, and it's definitely where you ensure, especially to that new player who's unsure of the general vibe, is that when you bring up what their intentions are and what they're going to do, it sounds like all of you try to phrase it in the way where that player maintains their agency, to borrow how Jenna explained it earlier. Like, if you do this, you're likely going to do that. Is that okay with you? Instead of right out saying, don't do that. That's a dick. Don't be a dick. Move on. No, that's not allowed. I can't let you do that. If you do this, the consequence will be this. And as therefore, you might not be having fun. And I want you to have fun. So you're kind of including them in the mix, and you're phrasing it in like using sort of the Socratic method where you're guiding them with questions and hypotheticals to get to the conclusion that you as the DM want, which hopefully and with experience is the right one for the whole table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's, you want to call people in instead of call people out.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's the like, hey, I want to help you have a better time and for everybody to have a better time, and you're new, so you don't know the table etiquette that everyone else is just kind of taken for granted.
Okay, so
I would
table
like
etiquette.
to.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I would like to just point out, though, that this is all very different from if your players' characters are doing something that you as a DM didn't set up for them. We are not talking right now about a situation where you have a fun puzzle on the door and they go, well, I have an axe, I'm just gonna chop the door up. And you go, oh man, I put this fun puzzle together, but I wanted them to do it. That's not the situation we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It does make sense that a character that doesn't have any patience with puzzles is going to try and hack the door up, but it doesn't lessen the fun for anybody else, and it doesn't step on anybody else's toes to do that. And if you as a DM really like puzzles and your players have told you that they are not really interested in puzzles, then that's something that should have been talked about in the session zero thing. Like, there's other things going on with that scenario, but that's not the same as a new player who doesn't understand they need to take other people's feelings and personhood into account when playing games, just so we're clear on that.
I think that's a very valid point. We go ahead.
Oh,
Philippa.
sorry. Do you want to? Are you asking more things or adding?
Well, I was going to switch to a different point of table etiquette.
I was just going to quickly add on to that as well, as like in-player problems and out-of-player problems should be, like, in character and out of character should be treated separately, and like don't punish someone in character for something they're doing out of character. Just talk to them. Like, that is the main thing I've seen over and over again, is like, just talk to people out of character.
But as a new player, I have this axe. Why shouldn't I use my axe?
Exactly.
So someone mentioned table etiquette and building dice towers, for example. For the uninitiated, when you stack your pretty dice, and then you kind of take all your attention away, if you're not a good multitasker, at the important monologue that someone is saying or the heartful conversation, and you're just there stacking your dice. Unfortunately, we're not nowadays. We're not at a table. Not yet. Maybe in some months that'll happen again. We're in front of cameras, ideally, when we're playing our games. And maybe being on camera and being on mic is challenging for new players. And all the more so when that challenge involves having to read the physical cues of wanting to talk with the interpreter, like we are doing now. This is an ongoing exercise. So going a bit meta, what are some tips to maybe help, especially new players, but let's say even players that are new to the digital medium of online TTRPG, now at a BTT, sorry.
I think taking breaks is super important, and also being clear of when you start, hey, we're going to take a break after an hour, because I know, like, for me, I find it's much easier for me to pay attention if I know I'm going to have that break where I can kind of turn my brain off, and when it's coming. And also letting them know, like, hey, if you need to take a break, because, you know, for a new player, they're not going to know like how long they can really stay focused. Just tell me, because I would rather take a couple more breaks and have everybody be really engaged than have somebody who's zoned out halfway through and I'm having to repeat things, or we get to their turn and they have no idea what's going on. I would rather take those breaks, a couple more smaller breaks, to let people, you know, have some time where their brain can rest.
So frequent and announced scheduled breaks.
One thing I will do is I'll write down the players in an order, and I'll just make sure I'm like initiative, but out of initiative, like I'll just go through and be like, okay, what do you do? What do you do? So that everyone knows I'm going to ask them at some point, so they need to pay attention. But also, if I see they're not paying attention or something, like I won't necessarily be like, why aren't you paying attention? I'll just remind them of what's going on and be like, so what do you do? Just to sort of like gently be like, hey, like you're still part of the scene, even if you're not doing anything right this very second. But, oh, what are you doing while they're doing that? To try and keep everyone focused. But like people are going to get distracted. People are going to be checking spells and stuff. So I think particularly when people are first starting, it's like give them a bit of leeway, help remind them what's happening, and just kind of reiterate the scene and ask what do you do next. I think can be quite helpful. But yeah, going through the list I think is sensible.
I super agree with both of those things. I, especially what Dawn said, I play with a number of neurodivergent people. I myself am neurodivergent. Everybody's brains work totally differently. But we have found that in all the games that we stream on LD&D and all the games that I play, we do take breaks. We take like a 5 or 10 minute break every hour or so. And it's really helpful for those of us with ADHD just to wrangle it back in a little bit. Rather than some games that are maybe 2.5 hours and then a break, and that can be hard for some people. Someone in the comments mentioned, what if you're so engaged that there aren't any breaks? And I think that I'm super happy for you if that's a position that you get in, but as a DM, you are responsible for kind of shaping this game, and part of that is making sure that everybody is taking care of themselves, and that includes humans need to go to the bathroom. Humans
Yes.
need water. Humans need food. I am assuming that you're playing with human beings here, but we have needs.
I mean,
So
that happens. I'm on that side. That happens to me. I get super into it. Sorry to cut you off, but like one way I do it is I put my phone with a clock on, and I'm like, okay, at 9 I'm going to have a break with my guys. I'm going to make sure they've got a break, and I just put stuff like I might even put a timer on sometimes if I know I'm going to be really into it, because as you say, Jenna, like it's super important to have some breaks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also those can be moments where, especially if you've got the alarm set, where you can kind of look down and say like, hey, everybody seems really engaged. Do we want to take a break or just keep moving on and maybe finish out this scene and take a break? Or, somebody can say like, well, I'm going to run to the bathroom. We're not going to take a whole 5-minute break, but just kind of give that one person a chance to take care of it.
Totally. Just making sure that everybody's sort of on the same page. Yeah, because you don't want, especially for a new person who like doesn't quite know the feel, you would feel really bad. Or I actually can't speak. I would feel really bad if I, as a DM, am like, oh man, everybody's into it. We can just keep going. And this combat's going to last another 45 minutes. And my new player is like nearly peeing their pants because they feel like it would be rude to walk away right now. No, it's just go to the bathroom if you need to go to the bathroom. I don't want anybody to be uncomfortable. So just like kind of saying beforehand is the,
I had a new player who was my friend as well, and she was like, I'm going to need to take a casserole out of the oven halfway through. Is that okay? And I'm like, yes, of course, that's fine. Just tell me when you need to go and get your casserole. It's not, not the end of the world. If we need to take a quick break, it's fine. So yeah, I think people do worry about it. So like, be proactive.
It could also be an interesting way to hook in players who have to AFK for something IRL, maybe to ask another player to recap what happened. So that also creates an expectation and onus on other players to continue paying attention. And should they need to AFK, another player returns that favor in kind.
That's a good point, because life happens, and I know I play with some people that like they have small kids, so if their babysitter calls, they're like, I have to take this because I have a tiny human I'm responsible for.
And this is a game we're talking about, right? We're playing a game. Don't burn your house down because you don't want to take the casserole out of the oven. We're playing a game. Your kid's screaming. Go help your kid. Like, this is not as important as some things that are happening in real life. But I think that especially over the past year with COVID and how work has changed to be over Zoom, one, normal things like eye contact, like turning to the person and being like, okay, what would you like to do? You cannot do on Zoom. So saying something like, Dawn, what would you like to do? Or Philippa, what is your player doing? Or Ada, it's your turn. It is just like so much more. I can't not do that on Zoom because otherwise it's kind of impossible for me to figure out what's going on. But we've kind of had sort of a weird cultural shift as far as work and professional appropriate things kind of being ported onto Zoom all of a sudden with kind of none of us expecting it. And then I can't speak for every culture. I am American, and kind of around where I'm from, it feels more like, okay, well, here's professional culture in an office, so that must be exactly the same as on Zoom. Except you can't, I've got upstairs neighbors who are vacuuming when I started this stream, and I can't just tell them to stop living their lives. Like, there are things that don't port to Zoom the same way, but we still kind of have those expectations. And I feel like, especially for people who work in office settings, it's very easy to bring those same expectations for a meeting. But we're playing a game. You don't have to mute yourself all the time just in case. And you don't have to, you're not stuck here forever. You can get up and stretch your legs. You can go get more water. Like, we're playing a game. So I feel like just this past year has kind of changed expectations a lot in a way that none of us were.
Also with that,
for life in general.
It reminds me of, we were talking about dice towers, and like, that's something, I don't know if everyone else has picked this up over Zoom, but I have, is just telling people like, put your headphones in. I'm a lot more just assertive and being like, hey, that's annoying, stop. And I think actually just being straightforward with stuff like that can be quite helpful. So if people start stacking their dice in person or they're tapping their pen on Zoom, you just go, hey, that's kind of annoying, please don't do that. Or, hey, that's making a noise, don't do that.
Or seeing one of your fellow players, seeing the notification in Steam that one of your players has logged into a game and is now playing this.
Yeah, you're like, hey, don't do that. Sometimes that's all you need to do.
Now, I will say with like some of the more fidget stuff, I usually with new people kind of try and be like, hey, is this something that you do because this allows you to be much more engaged? Like, I knit a lot when I'm gaming. I don't do it when I'm streaming, but in person games, like, I knit. It's something that I find like it keeps me my like physical, I need to get up and move around. My husband finds it very difficult to like sit still during games, so he'll oftentimes like get up and stand behind his chair. And so just kind of gauging that and maybe suggesting, if they do need something like that, finding something that's not going to be disruptive to the rest of the table. Like, that's why I knit, because it's not real, the needles that I have don't really clack, or giving instead of somebody sitting there like clicking a pen, being like, hey, maybe
could you get a stress ball, or
stress ball, or maybe they do stack their dice, and just kind of seeing, is this something that you're doing where your brain's going elsewhere, or is this allowing your brain to actually focus on the game?
Yeah, that's a good point. I will amend what I said. Don't say that's annoying. Say that's making a noise and it's distracting others. So like, phrase it in a way that they can be like, okay, I'll adjust to something that isn't doing that specific thing. But as you say, like, oh, I knit all the time when playing, so I totally get it. Yeah.
If you need to make your dice towers, recommend them a wonderful Etsy shop that makes felt trays that would absorb the sound when they fall.
There you go.
You support local businesses with your loud dice tower habits, and felt dice or fuzzy dice.
But yeah, if somebody's playing a video game, they're not paying attention.
And like
Jenna
said,
people will tell you, like, it's really common. Someone will show up, with their like markers and their bullet journal. Like, I'm gonna be, drawing out my borders for my next month's calendar. If that's okay, it helps me concentrate. Yeah. Or like Dawn said, like, you show up with knitting needles, and you're like, I like to knit. Like they kind of already have an idea of what is going to be, because that's pretty common. I mean, everybody has been through some sort of school or whatever, where they kind of know, I do this to help me focus more. And I have found that most players who have something like that kind of already know what it is and will tell you beforehand. It's really common for them to like, hey, look, here is my knitting. I'm holding it up in front of your face. I'm going to be doing this. Is a really normal thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think also maybe for new players, letting them know if you want to doodle, if you want to do these things, that it's not going to be distracting for the other players and it's going to allow you to focus. Feel free. This is, we want to have fun. And if that's going to help you have more fun, great.
Good, like literally bring the suggestion to them, because perhaps a new player might not know that this can be an accepted outlet for whatever energy, because they're nervous, they're anxious, they're not sure if they're filling up to expectations, and maybe their normal way to deal with that would be to do something that makes noise, or to just reset their mind with some scrolling on Twitter or something. And that might not inherently be disrespectful in that context. So it's a good way to continue to welcome those new players by saying, like, just in case, if you have something that helps you, let me know.
Yeah.
You don't have to give me your medical report behind it, but if you trust me enough and we can work on this trust, then it'll happen. I'll make sure no one else asks you about it if that's what you want at the table. And we can welcome that and make it work for everyone. And that's definitely, I think, an attitude that lets players know that their character, and maybe everything that they bring to the table in terms of anxiety, who they want to better, is also welcome at that table. Their imperfect selves as their perfect selves are welcome at that table. And DMs, GMs should try to accommodate where possible. I mean, we're not psychiatrists, we're not saints either, and it's a learning curve for us as well.
But also
I
teach
think
people
that-
how to use push to talk.
Yes.
If they have noisy things, we can balance the two.
I think that being honest upfront with expectations and with scheduling and with structure, as we have said before, is really important. And that does include, like, hey, just so you know, we're going to have breaks, every hour, whatever it is, but feel free to still go to the bathroom if you need to. But also beforehand, especially with someone who is not familiar with TTRPGs at all, or familiar with how your group plays it, telling them a general idea of how long this is probably going to take is so important. Because with some groups I have, one of the players is 11. He's, it's a family game, and he goes to bed at a certain time. This game is 2 hours. That's now because he's going to bed at a certain time. And I've got games that are 4 hours, and I keep my games at 4 hours when I'm running them. And I have games where, especially when it's in person, they're like, all right, we're playing once a month. It's going to be a Saturday, and we're going to go for 6 hours. Like, kind of giving that information beforehand so for a 2-hour game, I don't need to bring any drawing. For a 6-hour game, I will have my iPad and I'll be sketching on Procreate while we do it. Like, that kind of helps me gauge what I need personally too. So that's sort of like setting the expectations beforehand. Really important. It's hard when you're a new GM and you're like, it's a one shot. I don't know how long one shots go. It's hard. You'll learn. It'll be okay. You might think it's going to be 4 hours and really it needs to be a 2-shot, and that's okay. But like, at least setting the expectation of the general idea of what you do.
I think it can be useful if you're not sure how long it will be, is just to basically be like, what's our deadline? So because obviously a lot of people have 9 to 5s, they need to go to bed on time. Basically being like, okay, we will finish at 10:30, 11, or whatever people are comfortable with. And then actually it can be helpful because then the players can help you also work towards it. If you see you're at 10 and you're like, okay guys, we've got an hour left, like, let's get a move on, you've been stuck on this puzzle for an hour, let's wrap it up. Or conversely, you finish a bit early, it's like, okay, we can chat and hang out for a bit. But I've had that problem, Jenna. You're halfway through and someone goes, oh, I actually need to leave in 5 minutes. And you're like, oh yeah, I didn't tell you how long this would take. So yeah, communicate what time you're finishing.
And then one last
one last thing.
tip on just digital specifically. I have found Philippa, she has a list and goes down the list, and I think that works really well. I love that idea. One of the things that we do on my streamed game is we have our Roll20 chat is not on the stream, so it's like a private chat. Obviously, if you have new players never played before, they're probably not going to be on stream, but just in general, when you're playing digitally, there probably is like the Zoom chat or the Roll20 chat or, you know, your Discord, whatever it is. There's going to be something that everybody can see. And we found that if there's some like RP happening and a player wants to jump in or wants to do something else, just putting in the chat, like, I want to do something, or I have an RP, or that can be a great place if you're not comfortable with something. That's where you put your X's, or that's where you put your, we need to move on, or I can't handle this, or whatever it is, you know, putting it in the chat. So especially if it's something where, for like a veils and lines perspective, if someone's really not comfortable, like this is a problem and we need to stop, it might not be easy for them to say, hey, this is my life experience and we need to stop talking about it right now for this reason. Like that might be really difficult in the moment. So just like putting an X in the chat and then like, no questions, we're just moving on, could be way easier for them. But yeah, I found that like, you might have noticed I'm extroverted and I talk a lot. You might have picked that up from the past almost 2 hours, and I can talk forever. So especially if I'm playing with someone who's a little bit more shy or introverted, having them post, you know, like, oh, I have an RP thing I want to do in the chat, that it makes it easier for the DM too, instead of going like, oh, we only have 45 minutes, like, let's get going. And then it gets skipped over, to be like, okay. And then I think Philippa wanted to do something. Did you? And then we move the spotlight and then nobody gets skipped. Is something that's important for people like me.
We can also, as we've been doing here, put your hand up or something like that can also be helpful as well.
And that works for in-person games.
Yeah.
I'll often tell players, like, raise your hand if you don't want to interrupt, but you have something to add.
Indeed, indeed. Jenna brought up something which I think is good for our next topic before we still have quite a bit of time left. When it comes to RP, sometimes new players aren't sure what they should bring or are not sure how they can apply themselves to the expectation at the table, whether all the other players, experienced players, are basically reenacting Lord of the Rings, or whether they're being more third person stoic. What would be good ways to, or what has been your experience rather, in identifying play styles, and what have been some methods you use perhaps to coax out or encourage that development of play styles in new players?
Good question.
This is where I think character creation is a big deal too. Just character creation philosophy here. But your players will tell you what they're interested in by putting their character together. If a player puts together a character that is super religious and uses a lot of divine magic, they're telling you that that's something they're interested in. So it usually that will give you some insight into how they're probably going to play this particular game that you're playing, based on the character that they've put together and what they think is interesting.
Philippa or Don?
There's the in D&D, I think we call it like the pillars of play, which is like exploration, combat, and sort of social or role playing. And there's some other stuff in there as well, like puzzles and stuff. But like if you kind of include those big three, then you can keep an eye on what everyone's enjoying. And if everyone's sitting forward and really enjoying themselves, do more of that. And then, you know, if everyone's like, oh, I'm not really doing it, they're not really enjoying it. So like kind of putting a little bit in at the beginning of a little bit of each can be quite helpful to help you gauge like over time what that person might like. But yeah, apart from character creation, it's kind of hard to, I think it's hard to see what someone will like before they start playing, because they might surprise you, because, you know, I've had friends who I didn't think would do much role play, and then they're like, yeah, go full role play time. And then others have done the opposite. So I think a lot of it is observation during play as well.
In
Mhm.
hindsight, with those friends that you said they didn't seem like they would role play, but then they ended
Yeah.
up being like Oscar nominated for their roles.
Yeah.
In hindsight, would you say there's something that was bubbling underneath that now you would have spotted, or just total surprise?
That's a good question. I'm thinking I have a friend who, yeah, she's kind of developed a lot as a role player over time. And yeah, when she started, she was a little bit, it was more so, I think she was just new to the game and not sure. And then, yeah, once we kind of like got her comfortable, she just blossomed. So I don't think it's something I would have necessarily seen from her. Like, she hadn't done much theatre background or anything. So I wasn't really sure if she would enjoy it or not. But yeah, so I'm not sure if there was really any sign of either way. But just like she got engaged quickly, she was like, yes, I'm going to make this character and like this and like this and like this. So just, yeah, it's they're picking up what you're putting down, I guess, is a good sign, and just keep following what they're enjoying, really. Is the best way to find out.
Yeah, I've played with a lot of people who do have a theater background, and it is interesting because some folks get really into the role play and some actually find it difficult because they're so used to being given a character and lines that trying to come up on their own. So I tend to ask like, hey, have you ever had any interest in improv acting? And if somebody's like, oh, that sounded really interesting, figuring they're probably going to have a little bit more comfort diving into the role play aspect, since that's what a lot of what the role play is we're kind of playing improv games. And then kind of gauging like, have you ever wanted to write or stuff like that? Sometimes that can lead to more of the people that they want to do more of the third person describing what's happening versus acting out what's happening. But yeah, I agree. It's a little hard to tell because it's something that sometimes people really surprise you either way.
I think that's a good message also, not just to DMs and GMs of new players, but to the new players themselves, is that you might not necessarily yourself have some sort of background or expertise in role playing, writing, lore creating, or this other thing, but just by the very nature of sticking it out and getting to grow with us as a group, as a person, as a friend, you might surprise yourself. And you might end up indeed getting that Oscar nomination for your portrayal of the tiefling rogue who was orphaned, and you know. So I saw an interesting
I think it's
question in the
also
chat. Go ahead,
important to
Jenna.
keep in mind, since we're talking about new players specifically, that they might not know what they're interested in yet.
Yeah.
So that might change as they play. So when I started playing TTRPGs, I came from a video game background, and I'm not interested in role-playing video games because there's like 4 options and they're all dumb, and none of them are what I would say. So I came in thinking that I really liked combat, and I was gonna get a big axe and I was gonna smash everybody. But in RPGs, it's kind of a totally different thing, and I found out from playing that I actually really like the role play side of it. And I thought I was going to like puzzles, and I found out that I'm not as interested in puzzles. So this is a learning experience for new players, especially if it's a kind of game where they didn't know you could do that in this game. They didn't know this game had that aspect or that mechanic or whatever. Like if it's a discovery, they're not going to know either. So kind of be patient and give a lot of grace when they might find out partway through a one shot that they're actually not interested in the character that they picked at all and they kind of want to do something else. Just let that be okay. It's fine. As long as everybody's still having fun. We're learning as we go. It's part of it's part of figuring out the game, like, and there's a learning curve for everybody. So like, yeah, just give a lot of grace as everybody's trying to figure it out.
Which
And
ultimately
I
leads
think you
to
can also,
discovery lanes as well. Go ahead, Dawn.
yeah, I think I was going to say something similar of like allowing for that excitement of you get to find out what it is. Like tabletop RPGs can be so many different things, and this is some of the fun of figuring out what that new player them figuring out what it is that they want or what characters they like. So yeah, as Jenna was saying, if they have a character that they're not connecting with, be like, cool, great, let's find one that you are.
And we've been talking about like trying one shots to start with, but if they are being introduced to a campaign, like I think that's very useful to have. Say you get to level 3 if you're playing D&D, or you know, you get at a certain point, you go, do you want to change anything right now? Like, you've had a few sessions to get used to your character. Is there anything you want to change? We did that recently in a campaign I was in, and it was great because even though I didn't end up changing anything, I liked the flexibility that I could have changed something. And it's like, oh, okay, weight off my mind that if I pick something I don't like, I can change it. I also use a lot of like anonymous surveys. Like if there's been a sort of a cool moment that seems like a nice like sort of an episode end of a section of the campaign, I'll be like, okay guys, what are you liking? What do you want more of? What do you want to change? And often no feedback is therefore quite good because they're like, I don't want to change anything, I'm not going to answer. But then if someone's not enjoying something, they can tell you. And if you make it anonymous, then, you know, they don't feel any pressure that you're going to be like, okay, well, you should leave. So that can be quite useful for longer introductions to stuff.
That's interesting. So essentially, like, would you like to take a survey on rating your customer satisfaction?
Yeah, it's like,
after this transaction?
I always include one at the end, and it's like, and who is the best dungeon master in the world? Phil. As a joke, to make them be like, it's not that serious, guys. Don't worry about it.
So I do think it is helpful with new players to actually, when you get to the end of that, like one shot or something, ask them for feedback of like, what did you like? What didn't you like? Because then you as the game master can kind of either, if they're continuing with your group, you can keep that in mind, or you can also kind of help direct them to like, oh, you didn't enjoy this aspect. There's another game out there that focuses more on the aspect you did enjoy. To kind of like help let them know like it's not just this one game, there's lots of options.
Or even
I think breaks are good
just
for that
one...
too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or
Sorry.
even just this one shot is particularly focused on this area. Not all of it's going to always be like this. Sometimes, you get stuck in one view, and then it's like, actually, there's lots of different things we can do.
Yeah, just when you're playing a game and you have a break, if you've got 5 or 10 minutes and everybody's getting water, or you're in person, you know, you're back in the kitchen and you're loading more cookies on your plate or whatever it is, just kind of like, hey, so is this about what you expected? Like, how you feeling? How you doing? Like, just kind of, it can really be that casual, just what's going on with you. And I think when you're in a break setting, it feels more, I was never in theater, but it kind of feels more like when you're playing the game, there's like almost an on stage feeling. And then during a break, it's like like a backstage kind of feeling. Yeah. So just the like, oh, this is like way more gritty than I was expecting. Or, oh, actually combat was way easier than I thought it was going to be, or whatever. And kind of getting that like mid-game feedback so that you can do little adjustments if you need to. Super helpful.
Okay. With the time we have left, because I didn't see that many like new questions that we didn't already kind of delve into or kind of touched on. In the time we had left, because I am talking to some very experienced, well-played, rounded women who are very confident in the craft that they have amassed over their time playing, I'd like to, in the time left, concisely a bit, can you recall and recount your first time playing a tabletop RPG? Do you know what you did, what you didn't do? Was it something crazy? Were you nervous the whole time? So let's go clockwise from the screen. I'll start very briefly. Like I said, I haven't been playing very long. And my first game and primary game is Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And I wanted to be the archer with the pet. And not knowing anything about archetypes, I decided I'm going to be a Beastmaster Ranger. Oh,
that's it. That's the one.
That's it. That's where we did it. And I remember being in a bit of a tizzy, watching all these tutorials, getting very confused by combat, being very nervous that I wouldn't know what to roll, what to add, because my sheet was looking very intimidating. But when we got to the session, the combat and my nerves about that wasn't what I remembered. It was that I ended up being way goofier than I had intended my character to be. So one of the first things I asked to roll for was Tarzan swinging over vines over a marsh. That was fun. And then one of the other more memorable things I remember doing, like this was my first or second session, we were in ruins and there were bullywug corpses. We were inspecting these corpses, and then we heard in the distance some other footprints coming. There wasn't much time to hide. So my character, not being the charismatic performer at all, managed to roll very well to go behind a dead bullywug, pick it up. She was a halfling, pantomime it and pretend to be dead and tell the other bullywugs, no, go away, it's cursed, go. And TLDR, 2 weeks ago, we just killed Orcus.
Yay!
Like you do.
Like we do 3 years later.
A normal progression.
Holy moly, but we really did, like, holy moly. But those were my first memories of like first, second session playing. And I remember that like, oh, eventually readings like, I guess I chose wrong, but I'm going to stick with it and I'm going to make it mine. And I'm going to make an active decision to just be silly and roll with it and see where the story takes me. And I think that at least has been my principle as a fairly new player, to just kind of roll with the punches. I'm still learning, I'm a bit of a control freak, but that makes me much more excited and more confident to let loose in the upcoming one-shots we're going to do, for example. So I'm very much planning to get loose at Glitter Hearts and in Honey Heist, and that'll be fun. There'll be a lot of firsts. So to go around, what can you recall or recount about your firsts? So Philippa.
So the very first time I tried tabletop stuff was at my partner's house with some of our schoolmates. We didn't, I think we only managed to play for about 10 minutes because we literally spent like 5 hours making a character and we didn't really, and then so Traverse like sci-fi stuff, so we like get to the thing and then we have like this beautifully clear plot hook place in front of us and we went, no, we're not going to do that, and we just went and just did something completely different, and then we ran out of time. So my very first experience was just not really playing, but my first proper experience was actually with Hoard of Cthulhu at my university's like RPG club. And they did it very well because they obviously were used to introducing new people. So they had all of the GMs for different games kind of line up and explain the premise of their game and sort of explain what you would expect to see in the game. So I almost ended up doing Vampire the Masquerade, which could have led me down a completely different path. But I was like, Cthulhu, I vaguely know what that is. I will go for that. So I was basically paid myself for that whole campaign, but it was great. But I think one thing I remember from it was everyone was very welcoming. Everyone was prepped on how to introduce new people and was very patient and happy for us to play ourselves and just sort of very like good at sort of setting expectations early on, which was nice. And that I think it was a good start because of that. But
the rest is history.
And got us to play ourselves, which meant I didn't spend 5 hours making a character, unlike the first time I tried. So that can be helpful as well.
Okay, thank you. So to go clockwise, Jenna.
My first gaming experience was about 7 years ago. We were playing the Lost Mines of, is it Phandelver?
Phandelver.
The one, the one in 5e that comes with the book, that one, classic. But of course, 7 years ago, it was a little bit more new. And I played the new player character. If you have never DM'd a new player before, there is like a 75 to 80% chance that they are going to put together a character that has very low charisma and that probably likes animals more than humanoids, so that player does not have to RP as much because they find it very intimidating. So I was a deep gnome druid. I was basically playing like a golem sort of character. who like didn't like people and only wanted to talk to animals. And pro tip, if you are running a whole party of new players, don't let every single one of them make that the character, because they probably will. And then you will have an entire party full of people who have characters that are bad at talking, and they're not going to have a good time. Don't let them do that, because they're going to want to.
Did you tame the wolves? In the I
Okay,
think there's a cave in the first part, and there's some wolves. Is a choice to tame or not? Were they your
there
babies?
is a cave. Okay, so here's what happened. I have an arc in my first couple sessions. The first session, Brina Crystal Fist, which is a name that's literally on the character sheet as like suggested names for deep gnomes. This is the level we were at here. Brina Crystal Fist, my deep gnome druid, stood back with the horses in the first encounter because she didn't care about the other people and she was more worried about the thing. So I watched the first encounter rather than getting in combat. Don't let your players do that. It made me very sad. And then we got to the cave where the goblins and hobgoblins were, and one of the other players had cast sleep on the goblins, and I was like, this is my first thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take my club and I'm gonna beat up that sleeping goblin. And my DM was like, you're gonna try and kill the slept? And I was like, yes. And I rolled a natural 1 on trying to beat up a sleeping goblin, and that was my very first thing that I ever did in D&D. So that tells you a little bit about who I am as a person. But then a couple sessions later, we're going through the forest and there is an encounter where you're basically like ambushed by 3 or 4 giant spiders. But I had super good perception. And so I rolled a nat 20 on perception, saw the spiders, and then cast like, I don't know, like charm animals or befriend animals or whatever it is. And rolled a nat 20 to do that. So I made like really good friends with one of the spiders and I named it Taters. And then I was like, I want to ride it, because I of course didn't understand how the spell worked, and rolled a nat 20 on that too. So my DM was like, yeah, you're just riding a giant spider. Why not? So I got like redemption that she like saved everyone from these giant spiders and was riding around on a giant spider named Taters with a little pet spider, giant spider named Agatha behind them. But my DM made me leave them in the forest. I was not allowed to keep them because it turns out that spell doesn't last forever.
That is
just
true.
rude.
That sounds like an epic way to kick off an adventure and a long, if I can use the word, career in TTRPG. So thanks for sharing that. And Don, best for last.
So the first game that I played, my partner was part of an ongoing game, and he was like, hey, I think you'd really enjoy this. Why don't you join us? So he actually sat down with me like the night before and built the character with me. He basically asked me like, what kind of character you want to play? And I was like, oh, I really like thieves and all that. So he was like, okay, we'll make you a rogue. We were playing Pathfinder first edition. And then he made some decisions where he was like, you're not going to understand the rules at this point, so I'm just going to kind of make some of the logical choices, but gave me a lot of the like, which of these 2 options do you think is closer to the character you want to play, which was really great that I wasn't getting overwhelmed with all of the numbers in that game. And then because it was an ongoing game, the game master said, well, if you're okay with it, I'd like to kind of get to a point in the story where we can introduce your character. That's probably going to take us about half an hour, maybe an hour in the session. And it was going to be like a 4-hour session. And he was like, so, and then we'll play and take a break about 2 hours in, and you're welcome to stay and keep playing. Or if you decide that's not what you want to do, you don't have to stick around for the full 4 hours. So that was nice. It was like, I got to dip my toes without committing to the whole day. I think they were actually doing 6 hours now that I say that.
It's a very thoughtful DM.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
And I actually found sitting kind of up until the point my character got introduced, I was able to learn kind of watching the other players do stuff and be like, oh, cool. This is I'm really excited about. And yeah, I found that the character I made, like I got really excited and really into it very quickly, which I was not expecting because I'm kind of shy around new people. But being able to kind of play this character where it was like, well, yeah, she's a little bit more outgoing and a little bit more gruff and to the point where she's just going to say what she's thinking. It was a really fun experience. And then I, also did a few things where it was like, the game master was like, I never thought of using that ability in that way. That's really cool. Where it was like, ooh, I can not only, play these fun characters, but also I like thinking outside of the box as far as rules. So it's I'm following the rules, but maybe this isn't the typical application of this, and finding those fun creative moments. I was like, yes, this is exactly what I've been looking for.
Getting validation, it seems, for coming up with that idea and executing it properly. So nice.
Yeah, getting that reward of like, oh, that's really cool. I never thought of that in that way.
Okay, so we've all come a long way. Before we go, there was one nice question in the chat from Melicity Jones, and wanted to know if any of you in particular have your own best practices checklist, something you could apply before or after a game.
Well, I'll just repeat again, steal the agenda stuff from Powered by Apocalypse is super useful. It has a really nice section on like introducing people to a game, and those sorts of games also encourage you to like read out a little bit of stuff like to set the tone before, and that combo of those two things and doing a little sort of mini session 0 setup, I think, is my main checklist. Is like go through the agenda for play, go through anything we don't want to do, and then get everyone excited. And then also like my final thing I always do before a game is I'll be like, I steal it from Brendan Lee Mulligan on Dimension 20 when he's like, whew, and like that's like the moment when we're like, okay, we're playing, let's go. And yeah, sort of to build up to starting, I feel like sets a really nice tone. And then after like check in as well. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about this in a minute, but like have a denouement after the game. Let everyone calm down and chat about what went on to kind of bring everyone back to real life again and get all the excitement out or stress or whatever is nice as well.
Or to gush about your DM and be profusely thankful for the work they're doing, because DMs live for that shit, and it's the food that helps us live and breathe.
Yes, thank your DM. Thank them. Yeah, just do it.
Everyone else? Yeah. What's everyone else's checklist?
I think I like, especially with a new player, making sure that hey, do you have everything that you need to game? And they like, do you have your character sheet? Do you have your dice? Do you have water or any food or snacks? Kind of before starting off, and then doing like a quick like, okay, so this is the game we're playing. This is the kind of similar to Philippa with what you were saying. And then I would say afterwards, I do like to kind of ask like everybody to go around and share a favorite moment, and kind of say like it can be a cool thing that the game master did, it can be something that another player did, but sharing something that you liked from somebody else is really good. And I think that's a great way for the new players also to get some feedback as well. Have the opportunity of somebody being like, you really jumped in, you did a great job, or I really liked how you played this character. I wasn't expecting that.
Sweet validation. Yeah. And Jenna, any checklist?
Definitely everything you guys said. I guess I would add, if it's someone who's very new, especially if we're playing online, just like, here's the campaign for D&D Beyond, and here's the link for Roll20, and don't worry about learning Roll20, where it's really easy, we'll show you while we're going or whatever. Making sure that I've given them everything they need, but also honestly just a lot of disclaimers of like, don't worry about learning Roll20, it's easy. Or, don't worry about all the math, we'll do it in D&D Beyond, it does the math for you. Or, don't worry if you're not super good at role playing. Like, just kind of don't worry, it's a game.
Yeah.
It is my big thing. And then at the end, games usually, like when you kind of wrap up a session, there will naturally be that conversation of like, oh, and I can't believe that happened. Oh, when this happened, I really thought, like, that's just kind of naturally going to happen. I love letting it go too, because then sometimes your players will kind of tell you like, oh, I think this is going on or whatever. And you're like, yes, give me fodder for the next game. Especially if you're playing on Zoom or people in like different time zones or whatever, it can sometimes get cut short. So being maybe a little bit more intentional when you have a new player of, is this what you were expecting? And, you know, letting people talk about that a little bit more, like exactly what Dawn was saying, but just kind of sometimes you got to steer it a little bit if there's a time crunch to be mindful of. But then I also kind of separately from that will maybe like text the person privately or, you know, message them on Discord or whatever it is, separate from the group, maybe the next day or something. If it's an afternoon game, like maybe that evening when there's been a little bit more time of like, so how did you feel about that? Is that what you were expecting? Are you interested in playing again? Is there something, and usually they'll tell you something like, yeah, but I think I'd like to try a caster, or I think I'd prefer sci-fi, you know, like once they've had more time to like process, that is not in that group setting and a little bit more private, because you might find things like, oh, I actually kind of thought this was a little bit intimidating, or I didn't really know how to handle that with this person, or whatever.
Or their immediate
so
reactions were maybe emotional at the time, and they had the day to, let's say, decompress, to figure out a more for DMs, GMs as well. Conversely, they have more times to sift through their thoughts, get what is it I actually wanted to say, and what is a more diplomatic, open, and accessible way to say this, instead of maybe at the moment where I could have snapped at them as a player or as a DM to say like, I didn't like that. Why did it happen? How do I feel about this? How can I, what is actually the problem? If there is a problem, is it worth having the conversation? And how can I solve it to keep having fun?
Yeah, so I love having both. I love having the group conversation right after where it's fresh and everybody's still excited. And then I will also have the personal conversations later when you've had time to process too. I think both of those are key for new players.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I like that. That's good.
So speaking of which, I think it is time for our group to have our decompression, as I believe our time has come to a close. Thank you, chat, for being with us, for engaging. I, as a relatively new player and a very, very, very new DM, I just played the first session of my first ever campaign like an hour before the stream started.
Oh,
so
congrats!
Oh God. So I definitely learned a lot. I took notes, and I hope to be employing some of those things. And I hope, I think that what was said here is also a lot of interesting new perspectives and approaches that experienced people can definitely learn as well. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your openness, and for being enthusiastic with me about this genre. And also for Hoard of Tales for helping us create that content and being part of that message going forward. So thank you all again so much.
Remind people who we are, where to find us and things.
Yes, we all have these things below our names. You can contact us. I think my more experienced co-speakers have a lot more knowledge to share, and I will use these things to follow them, to up their content and to poke their knowledge. So I invite the audience to do that as well. And don't forget to catch us for all the other one-shots coming later this month, which will be announced on Twitter and also on the Discord. I think also our gracious host is going to put this on YouTube, and all the relevant links are below if you scroll down. So thank you so much to Philippa, Dawn, and Jenna. I love this time with you. I love this time with our audience, and we hope to see you again very soon for our shows.
And thank you for kind of hosting and running this, by the way. And thank you, Carolyn, for being our stream master, a very important and not easy job. So thank both of you ladies too.
Lady power. All right, we'll see you next time. Toodles.